Hello everybody. Today we're over at the ocean and I just did an intro, but we're not going to use that one because it started over. So I'm just going to, we have an hour. We're going to read George MacDonald's book from the 1800s called Sir Gibbie. We're in it. So just welcome and enjoy where we are. I will just say that this beach is in a Beach Boys song. So I started singing it for us, but I'm not going to sing it this time because, I don't know, I'm usually private about where I am. Oh, look, he just took away. But if you go back on my YouTube channel and see my surfing video where I learned how to surf, it was here. So, everybody's gone surfing. Surfing USA. This is one of the beaches. They name a bunch, I think. Anyway, so welcome. We are, I won't say why we're at a different place today, but we are in a different location and I thought I'd share it with you. And it's pretty cloudy outside, so we can't see the sun, but anyway. Nevertheless, we get to enter this amazing story that's just, it's so profound. I don't know if you've been here before, just trust that you're here for a reason, but this book is so transformative and profound. George MacDonald was C.S. Lewis's mentor, the guy that wrote the Narnia books, best friends with Tolkien, and he said that he never wrote a book where he didn't quote directly or indirectly from George MacDonald. All right, and so he was his spiritual mentor. George MacDonald was C.S. Lewis's spiritual mentor, and so I just love him. He just shows us how to navigate this crazy world that we are walking through. All right, and so I'll do my best to block the wind. And all these people, there's so many surfers. I already showed them in the last video that you are not going to see because I started over. There's like maybe 40 surfers out there, maybe less. All right, so we get to see surfers in the background today. Today we're on Chapter 37, so don't worry if you're just getting here. Oh, and I do this to show people that we're starting the book because sometimes I do a little intro. And if it's on the playlist, then people just have to fast forward a little or they get to see the intro to this new part. All right, so this is called Mr. Sclater. There's a little baby crying. There's a camping ground nearby here, so look at all these seagulls. Wow. I'm just going to let the background speak for itself and I'll cover the mic and whoops. It may be remembered that upon Gibbie's disappearance from the city, great interest was felt in his fate, and such questions started about the boy himself as moved the Reverend Clement Sclater. This is in town, so he's out in the countryside. But back in town, questions came up about him, and we'll see why. Hold on. Baby's calming down. Such questions started about the boy himself as moved the Reverend Clement Sclater to gather all the information at which he could arrive concerning his family and history. That done, he proceeded to attempt sorry, there's a footnote from the last time, but I reread it about the water floods in the 1800s. So Mr. Sclater was satisfied in what direction he must look. The rain had abated a little, but the air was so thick with vapor that he could not tell whether it was really an object he seemed to see white against the brown water far away to the left. Hold on. I skipped a page, I think. Hold on. It caught together, I think. Yes. Sorry about that, y'all. Where'd it go? Hold on. The wind must have Okay, here. So strange. Attempt. Okay. That done, he proceeded to attempt interesting in his unknown fortunes those relatives of his mother whose existence and residence he had discovered. So I can sit this way actually and block the wind with my back. I didn't think about that. In this, however, he had met with no success. At the house where she was born, there was now no one but a second cousin, to whom her brother, dying unmarried, had left the small estate of the Withrops, along with the family contempt for her husband and for her because of him. So she married down to Gibbie Galbraith's father, Mr. Galbraith. I forgot his name. He died from drinking whiskey too much. But he was a sir. I think we'll see where the family line came from. Along with the family contempt for her husband and for her because of him, inasmuch as by marrying him she had brought disgrace upon herself and upon all her people. So said the cousin to Mr. Sclater, but seemed himself nowise humbled by the disgrace he recognized, indeed almost claimed. As to the orphan, he said, to speak honestly, as he did at least that once, the more entirely he disappeared, the better he would consider it. Not that personally he was the least concerned in the matter, only if, according to the scripture, there were 2 more generations yet upon which had to be visited the sins of Sir George and Lady Galbraith. It says it goes down 7 generations, but anyway. What are these flies? I hope they're not biting. Anyway, I hope you can see the surfers surfing. I see them all, but I can't zoom in with this direction. Anyway, we get the ocean at least, and the calming. I'm just saying thank you, God, for this time. Bless every single person here. Bless the reading of this. Teach us what you want to teach us and help us just enter the story and let go of everything else and learn and listen and be present. Thank you for bringing this into our little portion of the world right now. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, so as to the orphan, he said to speak honestly, as he did at least that once. The more entirely he disappeared, the better he would consider it. Not that personally he was the least concerned in the matter, only if, according to the scripture, there were 2 more generations yet upon which had to be visited the sins of Sir George and Lady Galbraith. The greater the obscurity in which they remained, the less would be the scandal. The brother who had taken to business was the senior partner in a large shipbuilding firm at Greenock. This man, William Fuller Withrop, by name, Wilful Withrop, the neighbors had nicknamed him, was a bachelor and reputed rich. Mr. Sclater did not hear of him, what roused very brilliant hopes. He was one who would demand more reason than reasonable for the most reasonable of actions that involved parting with money. Yet he had been known to do a liberal thing for a public object. Waste was so wicked that any other moral risk was preferable. Wow, he didn't want to waste, but anyway. Of the three, he would waste mind and body rather than estate. Man was made neither to rejoice nor to mourn, but to possess. That was his motto, right? This guy. To leave no stone unturned. However, Mr. Sclater wrote to Mr. Withrop. The answer he received was that, as the sister concerning whose child he had applied to him had never been anything but a trouble to the family, as he had no associations with her memory save those of misery and disgrace, as before he left home her name had long ceased to be mentioned among them, and as her own father had deliberately and absolutely disowned her because of her obstinate disobedience and willfulness for marrying Mr. Gilbraith, right? Gilbert Gilbraith, I think. George was Gibbie's father. All right, now we know. I forgot his name. Thank you. As before, her name had long since to be mentioned among them, and as her own father had deliberately and absolutely disowned her because of her obstinance and disobedience and willfulness, it could hardly be expected of him, and indeed would ill become him, to show any lively interest in her offspring. Still, although he could not honestly pretend to the smallest concern about him, he had, from pure curiosity, made inquiry of correspondence with regard to the boy, from which the resulting knowledge was that he was little better than an idiot, whose character, education, and manners had been picked up in the streets. So they called him an idiot, and you know, if you've been with us, and if you're learning now, he's not an idiot, Sir Gibbie's not. But that's a walkway, that's what the cones are for. I walked up and I saw these cones, and I was wondering what they were, but anyway, we're starting here. Otherwise I have to edit the intro part, and that's not going to work. Anyway, all right. So nothing, he was satisfied, could be done for such a child, which would not make him more miserable as well as more wicked than he was already. Therefore, etc., etc., etc. So they're acting like he was an idiot and just picked up his manners, when really he helped everyone in the town and everyone loved him, and he could find things, and he was very intelligent. He just was mute. He couldn't speak. Thus failing, Mr. Sclater said to himself he had done all that could be required of him, and he had indeed taken trouble, nor could anything be asserted, he said further to himself, as his duty in respect to this child, that was not equally his duty in respect of every little wanderer in the streets of his parish, that a child's ancestors had been favored above others, and had so misused their advantages that their last representative was left in abject poverty, could hardly be a reason why that child, born in more than probability with the same evil propensities which had ruined them, should be made an elect object of favor. This is how the world thinks, especially when they get their grubby hands on money, right? There's nothing wrong with money. Money is not the root of all evil. It's the love of, it's pursuing that over God, making money into a god. And so you don't want to be bound by it or chase after it or get your worth from it, or anyway, you can learn that yourself. Let's see what the story will teach us this as well. And so, who was he, Clement Sclater, to intrude upon the divine prerogative and presume to act on the doctrine of election? Was a child with a Sir to his name anything more in the eyes of God than a child without the name at all? Would any title, even that of Earl or Duke, be recognized in the kingdom of heaven? His relatives ought to do something, they, failing, of whom could further requisition be made. There were vessels to honor and vessels to dishonor. To which class this one belonged, let God in his time reveal. A duty could not be passed on. It could not become the duty of the minister of a parish. So this guy's a pastor, and you'll see, he gets connected to this money somehow, and so he's looking for Sir Gibbie, the child, And he's like acting like he does his best, but I can't remember if he gets to keep the money if he doesn't find him, or, you know, manipulation happens sometimes, unfortunately. God keep us all from that. It could not become the duty of the minister of a parish just because those who ought and could would not spend time and money to the neglect of his calling in hunting up a boy whom he would not know what to do with if he had him, a boy whose home had been with the dregs of society, right? That's just what he heard. So this is just speculation and rumor. Everybody's gone surfing, surfing USA. Like they're walking out with the surfboards. All right. One morning, as he sat at breakfast with his wife, late Mrs. Bonneman, and cast as is, I fear, the rude habit of not a few husbands, not a few stolen glances as he ate over the morning paper, his eye fell upon a paragraph announcing the sudden death of the well-known William Fuller Withrop. So I think this is Sir Gibbie's mother's brother, of the eminent shipbuilding firm of Withrop and Playtell of Greenock. Until he came to the end of the paragraph, his cup of coffee hung suspended in mid-air. Then down it went, untasted. He jumped from his seat and hurried from the room. For the said paragraph ended with the remark that the not unfrequent incapacity of the ablest of businessmen for looking the inevitable in the face with coolness sufficient to making of a will was not only a curious fact, but in the individual case a pity, where £200,000 was concerned. Wow, that's a lot right now. But that was certainly a lot in the 1800s. I think this was written, let me look. I don't know when he's retelling the story, when that takes place. He doesn't really say, but this was written in 1810, I think. Let's see. That book I read of, here, I'll show you this. There's like a film here, right? It's one of those, an old picture. This is, anyway, this is for later in the book, but it doesn't say. I think the one mysticism book that I read of Evelyn Underhill was, I think, no, she wrote it in 1911. Okay, so this might be the late 1800s. I forget. All right. So, £200,000, that's so much. Had the writer been a little more philosophical still, he might have seen that the faculty for making money by no means involves judgment in the destination of it, and that the money may do its part for good and evil without, just as well as with, a will at the back of it. Let me see what that said. Had the writer in the newspaper, right, been a little more philosophical still, he might have seen that the faculty for making money by no means involves judgment in the destination of it. So someone that has the faculty to make money doesn't necessarily carry the faculty of thinking where it ought to go later. It's so weird, because I was just thinking of something like that this morning. And that the money may do its part for good and evil without, just as well as with a will at the back of it. Okay, so even had someone written a will, it might have gone to people that it ought not to go to, and it doesn't do good. Anyway, there we go. But though this was the occasion, it remains to ask, what was the case of the minister's precipitancy? Why should Clement Sclater thereupon spring from his chair in such a state of excitement that he set his cup of coffee down upon its side instead of its bottom, to the detriment of the tablecloth and of something besides, more unquestionably, the personal property of his wife? Why was it that, heedless of her questions, backed although they were both by just anger and lawful curiosity, he ran straight from the room and the house, nor stayed until at once The same moment his foot was on the top step of his lawyer's door, and his hand upon its bell. I didn't know a minister has a lawyer, but whatever. No doubt it was somebody's business, and perhaps it might be Mr. Sclater's, to find the heirs of men who died intestate. But what made it so indubitably, so emphatically, so individually, so pressingly Mr. Sclater's, that he forgot breakfast, tablecloth, wife, and sermon altogether, that he might see to this boy's rights? Surely, if they were rights, they could be in no such imminent danger as this haste seemed to signify. Was it only that he might be the first in the race to right him? And if so, then again, why? Was it a certainty indisputable that any boy, whether such an idle tramp as the minister supposed this one to be or not, would be redeemed by the heirship to the hugest of fortunes? Wow. So reverse, it's a transference, a wealth transference, if you've heard about that a lot lately. They call it a jubilee or a wealth transference, when there's a verse that says the wealth of the wicked is stored up for the righteous. And like in Egypt, when the Israelites left and they had been slaves for 400 years, they asked God told them through Moses, I guess, to just ask the Egyptians for clothes and money and gold or whatever. And they just gave it to them. They had been under the plagues. And they said, just take it and leave. And then the Pharaoh came after them, but he was defeated by the waters that fell upon him. You know, and they walked through the dry land. I have a wetsuit. This doesn't look that intimidating to come out here. My friend has a foam board I can borrow. I did before, but anyway, just decide that. All right. Had it some time before this become at length easier for a rich boy to enter into the kingdom of heaven? Really? Does it? Because he's a minister, right? Or was it that with all his honesty, all his religion, all his churchism, all his Protestantism and his habitual appeal to the Word of God, the minister was yet a most reverential worshipper of mammon, materiality, which can be our egotism as well. Not the old God mentioned in the New Testament, of course, but a thoroughly, quote, respectable modern mammon, decently dressed, perusing a subscription list. No doubt justice ought to be done, and the young man over at Roughrigs was sure to be putting in a false claim, but where were the lawyers whose business it was? There was no need of a clergyman to remind them of their duty where the picking of such a carcass was concerned. Wow. Had Mr. Sclater ever conceived the smallest admiration or love for the boy, I would not have made these reflections, but in his ignorance of him and indifference concerning him, he believed there would at least be trouble in proving him of approximately sound mind and decent intellect. Well, he just assumed this, right? What then, I repeat, and leave it, did all of this excitement on the part of one of the iron pillars of the church indicate? From his lawyer, he would have gone at once to Mistress Croll. Indeed, I think he would have gone to her first to warn her against imparting what information concerning Gibbie she might possess to any other than himself. But he had not an idea where she might even be heard of. He had cleansed his own parish, as he thought, right, by pulling up the tare, contrary to the commandment, and throwing it into his neighbor's, where it had taken root and grown a worse tare than before. Okay, so Jesus talks about the angels say to him, you planted all these good seeds on this earth. Someone else came in and threw these bad seeds. Should we pull them all up? And wheat, when it grows with the tares, the tares are these weeds. They look just like the wheat. They just look just like them until they start budding fruit. And so Jesus, or in the parable, he's saying to the angels, God's saying to the angels, no, leave them be, let them grow with the wheat until the end of the harvest comes, and then you'll know the difference. And you'll take up the tares and burn them. And those that bear good fruit, you know, that anyway, I'll let you read that. But this man, thinking he was doing God's will, told this woman, you better stop selling whiskey in our neighborhood and come to church already. And she knew the Bible very well and quite well. She quoted it to him and said all these other things to him, like, look, I make sure that people get home safe, and I make sure that they don't drink too much. And well, I don't know, they might drink a lot, but you know, they have to be clean when they come in here. They can't speak bad words. They can't speak poorly of people. I don't know. She had all these rules, because people often do around our addictions and stuff. But anyway, you know, maybe she would have been corrected herself, but he shamed her, and then she went to a worse neighborhood and worse things happened. But those are earlier in this book, so you can go back to the beginning if you'd like to listen to that, or just continue to stay with us. All right, hold on, because I block it when kids are there. I will, let's see. Oh, they're out of sight. Okay, I'll just do it a little bit more this way. All right, and so so he knew something from her, but he didn't know where to find Mistress Crawl, because she knew Gibbie as a child. All right, and so she had grown a worse terror than before, until at length she, who had been so careful over the manners and morals of her drunkards, was a drunkard herself and a wanderer, with the reputation of being a far worse woman than she really was. For some years now she had made her living, one poor enough, by hawking small household necessities, and not unfrequently where she appeared, the housewives bought of her because her eyes and her nose and an undefined sense of evil in her presence made them shrink from the danger of offending her. But the real cause of the bad impression she made was that she was sorely troubled with what is, by huge discourtesy, called a bad conscience, being in reality a conscience doing its duty so well that it makes the whole house uncomfortable. All right, so she was suffering from a bad conscience. Her conscience was trying to correct her. And so it does make your whole house, your inner house, uncomfortable. You know, people try to numb it, and it's like, don't numb it. Just go to God. Ask for full forgiveness. Ask for, give me direction and wisdom how to walk in your way now. That's it. And anyway, on her next return to the Doorfoot, as the part of the city was called where she now was most at home, she heard the astounding and welcome news that Gibbie had fallen heir to a large property, and that the reward of £100, a modest sum indeed, but where was the good of wasting money, thought Mistress Sclater, had been proclaimed by tuck of drum to anyone giving such information as should lead to the discovery of Sir Gilbert Galbraith, commonly known as wee Sir Gibbie. A description of him was added, and the stray was so kin-speckled that Mistress Crawl saw the necessity of haste to any hope of advantage. She had nothing to guide her beyond the fact of Sir George's habit in his cups, you know, of whiskey that she used to serve him, and he died of that, of drinking too much, of referring to the property on Daurside, right? He goes up Daurside. Anyway, and the assurance that with the said habit, Gibbie must have been as familiar as herself. With this initiative, as she must begin somewhere and could prosecute her business anywhere, she filled her basket and set out at once for Daurside. There, after a good deal of wandering hither and thither, and a search whose fruitlessness she probably owed to great caution, she made the desired discovery unexpectedly and marvelously, and left behind her in the valley the reputation of having been on more familiar terms with the flood and the causes of it than was possible to any but one who kept company worse than human. And so they think she had like weird divine knowledge, but actually she had left town and saw where all the flood had come. So a giant flood had just come over the town, or I mean the countryside, and then into the town. So, okay, this is called the Muckle House. Oh, wow. Chapter 38. Anyway, the next morning, Janet found herself in duty bound to make inquiry concerning those interested in Miss Galbraith. So, okay, so Ginevra Galbraith, during the storm, Curdy went and rescued her, brought her up to the cottage up on the hill where the sheep were kept by Janet and Robert, her husband, who sort of adopted Gibbie, right, when he was just out in the woods, in the pastures and stuff. Anyway, a lot has happened until now, but you'll see. All right, so, and maybe you've been with me, or you've read this before and you're just wanting to listen to it out in nature. There's a wonderful man who reads it with a whole Scottish accent the whole way, and it's lovely. Anyway, so the next morning, Janet felt herself in duty bound to make inquiry concerning those interested in Miss Galbraith. She made, therefore, the best of her way with Gibbie to the Muckle House, but, as the latter expected, found it in ruin in a wilderness. Acres of trees and shrubbery had disappeared, and a hollow waste of sand and gravel was in their place. What was left of the house stood on the edge of a red, gravelly precipice of 50 feet in height, at whose foot lay the stones of the kitchen wing, in which had been the room whence Gibbie carried Ginevra. The newer part of the house was gone from its very roots. The ancient portion, all innovation wiped from it, stood grim, desolated, marred, and defiant as of old. So it stood. Not a sign of life was about the place. The very birds had fled. Angus had been there that same morning and had locked or nailed up every possible entrance. The place looked like a ruin of centuries. With difficulty they got down into the gulf. With more difficulty crossed the burn, clambered up the rocky bank on the opposite side, and knocked at the door of the gamekeeper's cottage. But they only saw a little girl who told them her father had gone to find the laird, and that her mother was ill in bed, and Mistress MacFarlane on her way to her own people. So they got away. They got through the storm, that's all. It came about afterwards that when Angus and the housekeeper heard Gibbie's taps at the window and looked out, saw nobody there but the burn, which is the river, within a few yards of the house, they took the warning for supernatural interference to the preservation of their lives and fled at once. Passing the foot of the stair, Mistress MacFarlane shrieked to Ginevra to come, but ran on without waiting a reply. They told afterwards that she left the house with them, and that suddenly missing her, they went back to look for her, but could find her nowhere, and were just able to make their second escape with their lives, hearing the house fall into the river, the burn, behind them. Mistress MacFarlane had been severe as the law itself against lying among the maids, but now, when it came to her own defense, where she knew herself wrong, she lied just like one of the wicked. "My dear Missy," said Janet when they got home, "you must write to your father or he'll be out of his wits about you." Ginevra wrote, therefore, to the Duke's and to the Laird's usual address in London as well, but he was on his way from the one place to the other when Angus overtook him, and received neither letter. Now came to the girl a few such days of delight and of freedom of life as she had never even dreamed of. She roamed Glashgar with Gibbie, the gentlest, kindest, most interesting of companions. Wherever his sheep went, she went too, and to many places besides, some of them strange, wild, terrible places, as would have terrified her without Gibbie, right? Without Sir Gibbie. This boy, this wild-haired, mute boy that's just so full of love. And he just, anyway. How he startled her once by darting off a rock like a seagull straight, head foremost, into the death pot. That's this water this waterway area thing, right? Let's see. She screamed with horror, but he had done it only to amuse her, for after what seemed to her a fearful time, he came smiling up out of the terrible darkness. What a brave, beautiful boy he was. He never hurt anything, and nothing ever seemed to hurt him, and what a number of things he knew. He showed her things on the mountain, things in the sky, things in the pools and streams, wherever they went. He did better than tell her about them. He made her see them, and then the things themselves told her, right? And so he couldn't speak, he's mute, but he showed her these things. And so she looked, and they told her what they were. It's so awesome. Anyway, she was not always certain she saw just what he wanted her to see, but she always saw something that made her glad with knowledge. He had a New Testament Janet had given him, which he carried in his pocket, and when she joined him, for he was always out with his sheep hours before she was, she would generally find him seated on a stone or lying in the heather with the little book in his hand, looking solemn and sweet. But the moment he saw her, he would spring merrily up to welcome her. It were indeed an argument against religion as strong as sad, if one of the children of the kingdom specially claims could not be possessed by the life of the Son of God without losing his simplicity and joyousness. All right? Those of my readers will be the least inclined to doubt the boy who by obedience have come to know its reward. For obedience alone holds wide the door for the entrance of the spirit of wisdom. There was a little to wonder at it in Gibbie, as there was much to love and admire, for from the moment when, yet a mere child, he heard there was such a one claiming his obedience, he began to turn to him, and the hearing ear, the willing heart, the ready hand, the main thing which rendered this devotion more easily and natural to him than to others, was that more than in most, the love of man had in him prepared the way of the Lord. So it made him love God, love the Lord, love Jesus. He who so loved the sons of men was ready to love the Son of Man the moment he heard of him. Love makes obedience a joy. And of him who obeys, all heaven is the patrimony. He is fellow heir with Christ. All right, so it says, when you accept Christ, you become fellow heirs with Christ. And you receive all of his heirship, everything from heaven, like the inheritance that God wants to give, the good sons and daughters. And Christ makes us good, and his righteousness becomes our righteousness. It's like he put on this robe of righteousness by living this perfect life and reconciling us with a perfect God. But anyway, on the fourth day, the rain, which had been coming and going, finally cleared off. The sun was again glorious, and the farmers began to hope a little for the drying and ripening of some portion of their crops. Then first Ginevra asked Gibbie to take her down to Glashruach. She wanted to see the ruin they had described to her. When she came near, and notions changed into visible facts, she neither wept nor wailed. She felt very miserable, it is true, but it was at finding that the evident impossibility of returning thither for a long time woke in her pleasure and not pain. She wanted to stay up in the cottage, I'm sure. So utterly altered was the look of everything, that had she come upon it unexpectedly, she would have not recognized either place or house. They went up to a door. She seemed never to have seen it. But when they entered, she knew it at once from the hall into a passage, which with what it led to being gone, the inner had become an outer door. A quantity of sand was heaped up in the hall, and the wainscot, the board on the bottom edge of the floor, the wainscoting, was wet and swelled and bulging. They went into the dining room. It was a miserable sight, the very picture of the soul of a drunkard. The thick carpet was sodden, spongy like a bed of moss after heavy rains. The leather chairs looked diseased. The color was all gone from the table. The paper hung loose from the walls, and everything lay where the water, after floating it about, had let it drop as it ebbed. So it had flooded in there, like up to the first floor, right? Anyway. She ascended the old stone stair which led to her father's rooms above, went into his study, in which not a hair was out of its place, and walked towards the window to look across to where once had been her own bedroom, right? It got washed away. But as she approached it, there behind the curtain, she saw her father motionless looking out. She turned pale and stood. Even at such a time, she had known he was in the house. She would not have dared to set her foot in that room. Gibbie, who had followed and entered behind her, perceived her hesitation, saw and recognized the back of the laird, knew that she was afraid of her father, and stood also waiting. He knew not what. He didn't know what to wait for her, but of course he was protective of her. All right. And so he said to himself, hers is no like mine. Nay, money has bad fathers, so good as mine. Becoming aware of a presence, the laird half turned, and seeing Gibbie, imagined he had entered in a prowling way, supposing the place deserted. Okay, so always, if we can learn something from this book, is people look at you and look at the world and look at other people from their own eyes. So if they want to take all the time, then they see you as a money grubber as well, even if you're not. And if they're always about their own interests, then they think that you're actually operating that same exact way. Or, you know, if they rob and steal and lie from people, they always assume you're doing that. Oh, these are mosquitoes. Shoot. I see one on my phone. Anyway, I think I just got a couple on me before. All right, so he thought he was a prowler, right? Supposing the place deserted. With stately offense, he asked him what he wanted there and waved his dismissal. Then first he saw another. Oof, there's the mosquito on my face. I don't want that. Oh, sorry. All right. Then first he saw another, standing white-faced with eyes fixed upon him. He turned pale also and stood staring at her. The memory of that moment ever after disgraced him in his own eyes. For one instant of unreasoning weakness, he imagined he saw a ghost, believed what he said he knew to be impossible. So he didn't believe in ghosts and got really mad when other people were superstitious. But they had told him his daughter had died, so he didn't know what was. Right? And so anyway, it was but one moment, but it might have been more had not Ginevra walked slowly up to him, saying in a trembled voice, as if she expected the blame of all that had happened, "I couldn't help it, Papa." He took her in his arms, and for the first time since the discovery of her atrocious familiarity with Donald, kissed her. She clung to him, trembling now with pleasure as well as apprehension, because he's been quite cruel to her. But alas, there was no impiety in the faithlessness that pronounced such a joy too good to endure, and the end came yet sooner than she feared, for when the father rose erect from her embrace, and was again the laird, there, to his amazement, still stood the odd-looking, outlandish intruder, smiling with the most impertinent interest. Excuse me. Gibbie had forgotten himself altogether, beholding what he took for a thorough reconciliation. That's what he thought it was, right? "Go away, boy. You have nothing to do here," said the laird, anger almost overwhelming his precious dignity, right? Because he became back the role of, I'm lord of this land, lord of this manor, you know? And so that's what happens when we forget that we're souls here in these bodies. We're not our roles. We act within them, but we're not these roles. "Oh, Papa," cried Ginevra, clasping her hands, "that's Gibbie. He saved my life. I should have drowned but for him." The laird was both proud and stupid, therefore more than ordinarily slow to understand what he was unprepared to hear. "I am much obliged to him," he said haughtily, "but there is no occasion for him to wait." At this point, his sluggish mind began to recall something. Why, this was the very boy he saw in the meadow with her that morning. He turned fiercely upon him where he lingered, either hoping for a word of adieu from Ginevra or unwilling to go while she was uncomfortable. "Leave the house instantly," he said, "or I will knock you down." "Oh, Papa," moaned Ginevra wildly. It was the braver of her that she was trembling from head to foot. Don't speak so to Gibbie. He is a good boy. It was he that Angus whipped so cruelly long ago. I have never been able to forget it. Her father was confounded at her presumption. How dared she expostulate with him? She had grown a bold, bad girl. Good heavens, evil communications. Right? If he does not get out of this directly, he cried, I will have him whipped again, Angus. He shouted the name, and its echo came back in a wild tone, altogether strange to Ginevra. She seemed struggling in the meshes of an evil dream. Involuntarily, she uttered a cry of terror and distress. Gibbie was at her side instantly, putting out his hand to comfort her. She was just laying hers on his arm, scarcely knowing what she did, when her father seized him and dashed him to the other side of the room. Wow. He went staggering backwards, vainly trying to recover himself, and fell, his head striking against the wall. The same instant, Angus entered. He saw nothing of Gibbie where he lay, and approached his master. But when he caught sight of Ginevra, he gave a gasp of terror that ended in a broken yell, and stared, as if he had come suddenly on the verge of the bottomless pit, while all round his head his hair stood out, as if he had been electrified. Before he came to himself, Gibbie had recovered and risen. He saw now that he could be of no service to Ginevra, and that his presence only made things worse for her. But he saw also that she was unhappy about him, and that must not be. He broke into such a merry laugh, and it had need to be merry, for it had to do the work of many words of reassurance, that she could scarcely refrain from a half-hysterical response as he walked from the room. The moment he was out of the house, he began to sing, and for many minutes, as he walked up the gulf, hollowed by the Glashburn, Ginevra could hear the strange, other-world voice. He's like humming, because he can't speak voice, right? And knew it was meant to hold communion with her and comfort her. What do you know of that fellow, Angus? Asked his master. He's the very devil himself, sir, muttered Angus, whom Gibbie's laughter had in a measure brought to his senses. You will see that he has sent off the property at once. For good, Angus, said the laird. His insolence is insufferable. That's the scoundrel, right? They keep seeing him through their eyes, because they are the scoundrels, unfortunately. On the pretext of following Gibbie, Angus was only too glad to leave the room. Then Mr. Galbraith, upon his daughter, So, Jenny, he said, with his loose lips pulled out straight, that is the sort of companion you choose when left to yourself, a low, beggarly, insolent scamp, scarcely the equal of the brutes he has the charge of, because he watches the sheep, right? They're sheep, Papa, pleaded Ginevra, in a wail that rose almost to a scream. I do believe the girl is an idiot, said her father, and turned from her contemptuously. I think I am, Papa, she sobbed. Don't mind me. Let me go away, and I will never trouble you any more. She would go to the mountains, she thought, and be a shepherdess with Gibbie, right? Who wouldn't want to be? Anyway, her father took her roughly by the arm, pushed her into a closet, locked the door, and went, and had his luncheon, and in the afternoon, having borrowed Snowball, took her just as she was, drove to meet the mail coach, and in the middle of the night was set down with her at the principal hotel in the city. Whence the next morning he set out early to find a school where he might leave her and his responsibility with her. Wow. When Gibbie knew himself beyond the hearing of Ginevra, his song died away. Knew himself beyond her hearing, right? And he went home sad. The gentle girl had stepped at once from the day into the dark, and he was troubled for her, but he remembered that she had another father besides the laird and comforted himself. She knows that he has the good Father in heaven, right? He's father to all. He's got the whole world in his hands, right? This guy named Trent Shelton, I made a remix of one of his videos a couple days ago because I put it in my story on Instagram, and it was like, when God's got you, nothing can stop you. And it was just this whole sweet dialogue of him talking to his son, saying, like, you know, if I knew more when I was little, what I would say to myself is trust God, keep trusting God, he's got you. His plans are so much better than our plans, so just keep yielding to his plans. But anyway, So when he reached home, he found his mother in serious talk with a stranger. The tears were in her eyes and had been running down her cheeks, but she was calm and dignified as usual. Janet, right? She had taken him in as her own son. "Here he comes," she said as he entered. "The will of the Lord be done, not now and forevermore." That's how she lives her life. That's what we were just saying. I didn't know that was the next line, right? "I'm at his bidding, and so is Gibbie," right? Gibbie yields to God. "It was Mr. Sclater. The witch had sailed her brander well." Okay, so they were calling Mistress Crawl a witch, and she got on the brander in the water and went back into town. And so I guess Mr. Sclater had found her. Okay, so this is chapter 39, Dower Street. One bright afternoon, towards the close of autumn, the sun shining straight down one of the wide, clean, stony streets of the city with a warmth which he had not been able to impart to the air, a company of schoolgirls, two and two in long file, mostly with innocent, and for human beings, rather uninteresting faces, was walking in orderly manner, a female grenadier at its head, along the pavement, more than usually composed, from having the sun in their eyes. Amongst the faces was one very different from the rest, a countenance almost solemn and a little sad, of still regular features, in the eyes of which, by loving eyes, might have been read uneasy, thought patiently carried, and the lack of some essential to conscious well-being. The other girls were looking on this side and that, eager to catch sight of anything to trouble the monotony of the daily walk. But the eyes of this one were cast down, except when occasionally lifted in answer to words of the schoolmistress, the grenadier, by whose side she was walking. They were lovely brown eyes, trustful and sweet, and although, as I have said, a little sad, they never rose, even in reply to the commonest remark, without shining a little, right? Though younger than not a few of them, and very plainly dressed, like all the others, I have a suspicion that Scotch mothers dress their girls too plainly, which tends to the growth of an undue and degrading love of dress. She was not so girlish. Go. Was indeed, in some respects, more of a young woman than even the governess who walked by the side of them. Suddenly came a rush, a confusion, a fluttering of the doves. Whence or how, none seemed to know. A gentle shriek from several of the girls, a general sense of question and no answer. I feel like I skipped something, but I didn't. He'll go back and retrace it. But as their ruffled nerves composed themselves a little, there was the vision of the schoolmistress poking the point of her parasol at a heedless face, radiant with smiles, that of an odd-looking lad, as they thought, who had got hold of one of the daintily gloved hands of her companion, laid a hand which, considered conventionally, was not that of a gentleman upon her shoulder, and stood, without a word, gazing in rapturous delight. "Go away, boy! What do you mean by such impertinence?" cried the outraged Miss Kemble, changing her thrust and poking in his chest the parasol with which she had found it impossible actually to assail his smiling countenance. Such a strange-looking creature. He could not be in his sound senses, she thought. In the momentary meantime, however, she had failed to observe that after the first start and following tremor, her companion stood quite still and was now looking in the lad's face, with roseate cheeks and tear-filled eyes, apparently forgetting to draw her hand from his, to move her shoulder from under his caress. The next moment, up, with hasty yet dignified step, came the familiar form of their own minister, the Reverend Clement Sclater, who, with reproof in his countenance, which was red with annoyance and haste, laid his hands on the lad's shoulders to draw him from the prey on which he had pounced. Okay, I don't think it's Donald. I think it's Sir Gibbie. Anyway, so she's in town at this boarding school, and he sees her, as what I remember, I think. Hold on. There's this mosquito. All right. Man, I just want to jump in the water. I don't think I bring a swimsuit on my car. I ought to, though. So here's Mr. Sclater, right? And in haste, laid his hands on the lad's shoulder to draw him from the prey on which he had pounced. Remember, you are not on a hillside, but in a respectable street, said the reverend gentleman, right? A little foolishly. The youth turned his head over his shoulder, not otherwise changing his attitude, and looked at him with some bewilderment. Then, not he, but the young lady spoke. Gibbie and I are old friends, she said, and reached up, laid her free hand in turn on his shoulder, as if to protect him, for needlessly was with such grace and strength before her, the vision of an old horror came rushing back on the mind of Ginevra from the childhood, right, when he was attacked sadly and wrongfully. Anyway, Gibbie had darted from his companion's side some 100 yards off. The cap with which Mr. Sclater had insisted on his wearing had fallen as he ran, and he had never missed it. His hair stood out on all sides of his head, and the sun behind him shone in it like a glory, just as when he appeared to Ginevra and the peat moss like an angel standing over her. He saved her on many occasions, right? Indeed, while to Miss Kimball and the girls he was a mad-like object, in his awkward, ill-fitting clothes, made by a village tailor in the height of the village fashion, to Ginevra he looked hardly less angelic now than he did then. His appearance, judged without prejudice, was rather that of a sailor boy on shore than a shepherd boy from the hills. Miss Galbraith, said Miss Kimball, in the tone that indicates nostrils distending, I am astonished at you. What an example to the school. I never knew you misbehave yourself before. Take your hand from this very strange-looking person's shoulder directly. Ginevra obeyed, but Gibbie stood as before. Remove your hand, boy, instantly, cried Miss Kimball, growing more and more angry, and began knocking the hand on the girl's shoulder with her parasol, with her umbrella, which apparently Gibbie took for a joke, for he laughed aloud. Pray do not alarm yourself, ma'am, said Mr. Sclater, slowly recovering his breath. He was not yet quite sure of Gibbie, or confident how best he was to be managed. This young gentleman is Sir Gilbert Galbraith, my ward. Sir Gilbert, this lady is Miss Kimball. You must have known her father well, the Reverend Matthew Kimball, of the next parish to your own. Gibbie smiled. He did not nod, for that would have meant that he did know him, and he did not remember having ever even heard the name of the Reverend Matthew Kimball. Oh, said the lady, who had ceased her battery and stood bewildered and embarrassed, the more that by this time the girls had all gathered round, staring and wondering, how is this a gentleman, a sir, right? As someone, a lord of the land type of thing, Ginevra's eyes, too, had filled with wonder. She cast them down, and a strange smile began to play about her sweet, strong mouth. All at once she was in the middle of a fairy tale, and had not a notion what was coming next. Her dumb shepherd boy, a baronet, there's what he is, and more wonderful still, a Galbraith, so like some kind of relative of hers. She must be dreaming in the wide street. The last she had seen of him was... Here, hold on, I'll turn the sun. Because we're just about to wrap up. Oh, it's about noon, so the sun's overhead. Oh, but I forgot this. Oh, shoot! I forgot the wind. And you can't see all the surfing. All right. Wow. I just got a smile from a surfer. I need to come out here more often. I'm being funny. I don't chase after any of this stuff. Anyway, so I'm almost finished. And wonderful still, a Galbraith. She must be dreaming in the wide street. The last she had seen of him was as he was driven from the house by her father, when he had just saved her life. That was but a few weeks ago, and here he was called Sir Gilbert Galbraith. It was a delicious bit of wonderment. Oh, said Miss Kimball a second time, recovering herself a little. I see, a relative of Miss Galbraith. I did not understand. That, of course, sets everything right. At least, even then, the open street, you know. You will understand, Mr. Sclater. I beg your pardon, Sir Gilbert. I hope I did not hurt you with my parasol. Gibbie again laughed aloud. Thank you, said Miss Kimball, confused and annoyed with herself for being so, especially before her girls. I should be sorry to have hurt you. Going to college, I presume, Sir Gilbert? Gibbie looked at Mr. Sclater. He is going to study with me for a while first, answered the minister. I am glad to hear it. He could not do better, said Miss Kimball. Come, girls. And with friendly farewell, she moved on, her train after her, thinking with herself what a bore the young fellow was. The young baronet? Yes, he must be a baronet, but he was too young to have been knighted already. But wherever could he have been brought up? All right. So I paid for an hour of parking. So I best go. And anyway, much love. I'll see you the next time we read this, probably on my hiking trail. Cheers. Make sure to like and share and all that stuff, if you will. That helps the channel and helps these videos go to more people. Everyone plays a part. Much love.